it's supposed to feel.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to tonight's episode of wNS9 Plus. I'm your host today, Jim Rosati. With me, no Tyler, no DiNardo. This show is all about Dave Parker. So we're bringing on Dougie Fresh. We're calling in to the bullpen, calling in Dougie Fresh. Dougie Fresh, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. My favorite thing to talk about, Dave Parker.
There you go. And then also joining the show, and I mean, just the resume speaks for itself. There's really no other person we could bring on to discuss Hall of Fame merits than Jay Jaffe at Fangraphs. You know, he's written a book about Cooperstown. He came up with the Jaws statistic that you see plastered all over Baseball References pages. He's been writing about this stuff for 25 years. So Jay, thanks for hopping on here tonight.
Hey, sure, good to be here.
So let's kind of get into this. So last week, they announced the Classic Baseball Era Committee announced their candidates for this year's Hall of Fame, and I think it gets voted on in about a month or so at winter meetings. But one of the players on the list is Dave Parker, who Pirates fans, they remember, quite fondly from his playing days here. I think DiNardo put out a poll on Twitter, asking people, should Dave Parker get into the Hall of Fame? The poll just ended, and obviously it's a very unbiased poll because almost all of our followers are Pirates fans, but 94.4% of the votes came in with a yes. So the viewers, the listeners, I think we're a pretty pro Dave Parker audience here. But let's kind of dive into it. I mean, just to kind of speak on his merits alone. He won an MVP award. He was 7-time All-Star, 2-time World Series champ, 3-time Gold Glove winner, 3-time Silver Slugger, won 2 batting titles. He was an All-Star Game MVP. He finished in the top 5 in MVP voting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 separate times, including his MVP win. All that considered, he's still not in the Hall of Fame. He's had quite a few chances over the years, but he hasn't been able to break through. So Jay, I guess do you want to kind of fill us in on like how we've gotten to this point with Dave Parker?
Yeah, okay. I think Dave Parker was clearly one of the best players in the game for, say, the first 5 years of his career, or not necessarily the first 5 years of his career, but 5 years early in his career from, say, 75 to 79. He had 4 outstanding seasons and one pretty good one. That's where the batting titles and the MVP award and the Gold Gloves come from, and all the World Series ring. I mean, he was on top of the world. The big reason, though, that he is not in the Hall of Fame is that outside of that stretch, he was not great very often, and he contended with injuries. He had drug issues with cocaine. Certainly a fall from grace. He had to testify at the Pittsburgh drug trials. He played for a long time. He played until 1991, so he had over a decade after that 5-year peak. And he had some big seasons in terms of putting up RBI, like 100 RBIs and 30 home runs here and there. Finished second in the MVP voting in 1985 when he went home to the Reds, and that was a really good season. When he finished fifth the next year, though, it was not a really good season. The problem was basically he'd lost all the dimensions in his game that had made him special. I mean, he was a base stealing threat when he was young. He was no longer that. He was a great defender when he was young. He was no longer that. He didn't walk a lot for a guy who had that kind of power and those kind of batting averages, and so he was just kind of a fairly ordinary player who sometimes put up some big RBI totals that tended to, that was the yardstick that people measured value by in those days, and now I think we have a better understanding of what on both sides of the ball how to measure value, and we see that outside of that 75 to 79 span, he was only sporadically a special player.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to argue with all of that. I mean, you look at his, you pull up his page and you look at his stats, and he went through a pretty long stretch there following 1979 where, yeah, he just kind of lost the MVP talent, right? It wasn't there anymore. I mean, he put up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 straight seasons starting in 1980. OPS plus never cleared 115. I mean, he was an above average hitter, from that point forward, but he kind of lost that, like you mentioned, that stuff that made him special. I said that those peak years, those years between 75 to 79, one of the best players in baseball, one of the best players in the National League. But I think that the reason why he's not in here, like you said, is just kind of once he hit 30, just kind of fell off a cliff.
Yeah, and it was, I think, kind of unfortunately a perfect storm of injuries and personal problems, and that really hit, and he was such a high profile player that I think that caused a lot of people to view him in a negative light. I mean, the Pirates tried not to pay him the deferred money that they owed him. That was something that you don't see that. Even back then, you didn't see that kind of behavior from a team. Now, certainly don't see it. I mean, there's complaints when a guy runs afoul of the law or something like that. I mean, but unless you've got an extreme situation like a Wander Franco, where a guy is broken the law to such a degree that he's going to be ruled ineligible to play, team's not going to get that kind of financial relief on a player. But I think the thing about it to me, and Parker has really kind of enjoyed a renaissance in popularity lately. I know that MLB Network made a nice documentary about him, and Dave Jordan did a book about him that I'm only now just getting to. And he's been very public in his fight with Parkinson's disease, raised a lot of money for it, and it's impossible to feel anything but empathy for the guy. Now he's been through the fire. I think he understands where the mistakes he made or whatever. I can understand. There's a certain sentimentality to want to put him in the Hall of Fame while he's still around to enjoy it, and it's a very tough thing to counter when I'm writing these profiles and trying to measure these guys against both the all-time greats who are in the Hall of Fame and the competition on the ballot. For me, Parker was just, I mean, I remember the 1979 All-Star game, those two throws. We were just talking about it just before we went on the air. Those two great outfield assists. I mean, you can't do any better. You can't make any better throws than those. And I remember I was bandwagoning the 79 Pirates through the playoffs. We Are Family. I was 9 years old at the time. I loved Willie Stargell. He was my favorite Pirate. But Dave Parker was obviously great. Anybody could see that. And so to have him, nice one there. To have to have to spend energy arguing that Dave Parker is not a Hall of Famer, is not a great choice for the Hall of Fame. It kind of sucks in a way. I was a little nervous when you guys asked me to be on this show because I don't want to sit here and beat him up over it. But at the same time, I try to take a rational approach to the institution and try to recommend which the best candidates are at any given time. And it's not me who's rendered this judgment first and foremost. It's the baseball writers, long before they'd ever heard of wins above replacement and Jaws. They saw Dave Parker as being lacking the stuff for the Hall of Fame. I mean, he got 17.5% of the vote when he was on his first ballot in 1997, and he was on 15 years, and only a couple times did he even break 20%. Jaws came into existence about halfway through there, but voters for the most part weren't reading me then. They'd already made up their minds about him, and I think a lot of that, unfortunately, has to do with what we know, what we knew then about his drug issues and just kind of the stain on the game that was the Pittsburgh drug trials. But when you think about the way that Parker has, I think, rehabilitated his image, it's not unlike Tim Raines, who got voted into the Hall of Fame in 2017, and he, famously had problems with cocaine as a young player. At the end of the day, I think voters can forgive that stuff, but if the numbers aren't there in their interpretation, that's really the bigger problem for him. And I think with Parker, despite the high hit total, 2,700 and what is it, 2,700 hits,
2712,
2712, and 339 home runs.
More than Ted Williams.
There's a sense that if Parker had been a little healthier and a little bit more dedicated in that dark period, he'd have gotten 3,000 hits, or he would have gotten close enough to 3,000 hits that he would have been able to limp his way to 3,000 hits in the end, which pretty much an automatic Hall of Fame berth. We saw Harold Baines get into the Hall of Fame with sort of a phantom 3,000 hits a few years ago, because the committee kind of filled in the blanks when it came to considering that he lost time in both the 81 and 94 player strikes, and Parker certainly lost time in 81. The problem was he wasn't any good then. That was one of his least effective seasons. So it comes back inevitably. It just comes back to the numbers, and we have such a good handle on offense, especially, that we can see that 121 OPS plus. Hey, that's pretty good. A Hall of Famer. I mean, we just watched Gary Sheffield fall off the ballot with a 140 something OPS plus for his career. That's fierce. Dick Allen, who I'm arguing to the end of my days here trying to get him into the Hall of Fame, is like 150. 120 just doesn't compete, unless you've got good defense to go with it. And Parker only had that good defense, in those early years of his career. By later on, he was more of a DH caliber corner outfielder.
I want to ask Doug a question here, because Doug, you've got obviously huge Dave Parker fan growing up. You've got a really good pulse on Pirates fandom, the Pirates fan base. Let me ask you this: I can't remember a Pirate like Dave Parker is beloved among Pirates fans. I feel like, I mean, he's revered, and there is a really strong push to get him into the Hall of Fame. And how much of that do you think just has to be with? I mean, this franchise has been awful, right, for about 30 years now. Since Dave Parker, I think fans have already kind of moved on. Like Barry Bonds isn't going to happen anytime soon. Since Dave Parker, there's not really another player on this team that you could say, hey, like, this guy's a Hall of Famer. Like, how much of that do you think comes into this with at least Pirates fans themselves? Like, Dave Parker's the last great Pirate that a lot of people remember. And like I said, I'm taking Barry Bonds out of the equation here. He was obviously unbelievable. But like, how much of that is a part of all of this?
I think that's part of it. I think there's also some revisionist history. Dave Parker was treated horribly by this fan base, in those early 80s when he was struggling. Dave Parker's sort of biggest sin is that he was a young, brash black man in the late 70s and early 80s, and that did not play well. And Then the cocaine thing. He was not voted in. And I mean, he didn't get the second MVP. He should have got the second MVP in '85. He had better numbers than Willie McGee, but the writers were punishing him. Something they've always done. Jim Rice did not get into the Hall of Fame until his 15th time on the ballot. Jim Rice was a Hall of Fame player. Dave Parker, that 75 to 79 stretch, if you were a Pirates fan and you were watching him play, and not just a Pirates fan, I mean, he was huge across the sport at the time. Baseball was had a bigger place in the national consciousness, and he was spectacular. Jay's already mentioned that the 79 All-Star game was an incredible display. In the World Series, he hit 341 in the World Series, or maybe it was 345 and 341 for the entire playoffs. But I mean, to me, he's got the 5-year numbers. He was him and Jim Rice were the two best players during that stretch, and he could do everything. Right, he was a true 5-tool player, and yeah, that's injuries, drugs. I mean, again, I sometimes think we forget what the Hall of Fame is. It's a museum that tells the story of baseball. If Dave Parker gets in, he's not going to be called Saint David. Little school children will not pray the rosary to him. But the sanctimonious gas bags that are the writers, there's a veterans committee for a reason, because the hypocritical writers, that were 99% white, and so many of them were alcoholics, it became cliche, but they're moralizing on the young black man who did cocaine. And that's where he lost a lot of his votes. He was a phenomenal player. Yes, his stretch of greatness wasn't as long as you would like. But if you throw 85 in there, 86, right. I mean, he wasn't as good in 86 he was in 85. He 2 World Series titles, could do everything. He's got good enough longevity numbers, right? 200 more hits, or 288 more hits, and he's got 3,000. That's again a magic number that gets him in. For a while there, 300 home runs was the magic number until steroids came along. The same writers who celebrated steroids and celebrated the players that are on steroids and built their brand on the players at steroids, who now won't vote for players who took steroids. Straight up hypocrisy from baseball and the writers. Dave Parker was again, for that 5-year stretch. In my lifetime, I don't remember a lot of players being as intimidating or as feared as he was. Right. And he was more intimidating than Aaron Judge he came across. And part of it, he was a 6'5" dude back when everybody was 5'10" and 6 feet tall. He was just a big, strong, tough looking dude who could do everything, and he did it. He won Gold Gloves. He stole bases. He won Silver Sluggers. He won batting titles. He won an MVP. He won a World Series. He has, right. There are guys with better numbers. There's also guys with lesser numbers. Of the 273 players in the Hall of Fame, he's about 50th, 51st, something like that, in hits, right behind Lou Gehrig. More hits than Ted Williams. He played more games. I don't want to, skew that, but his numbers are good enough. He should be in. And yes, Jim, you're right. I mean, it's now a little bit nostalgia. Us Pirates fans may never see another guy play the bulk of his career and make it to the Hall of, with Pittsburgh, and then make it to the Hall of Fame. That just seems impossible now. It seems unlikely. And so, he might be our last guy. And that's why we're going to get, misty-eyed when it comes time for Kutch too, right? Kutch is, it doesn't look exactly
he's going to be in that
like
same boat
he's going to have the numbers.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
We're going to, we're going to be wanting him to get in there. So.
Jay, you got anything to respond to?
Yeah, I think I think you look at the number. The career totals are one thing, and yes, I think 2,712 hits is impressive. 339 home runs is impressive. The thing is that we can measure more. We can measure more than that, and the counting stats are good, but they don't tell us everything. We've got admittedly rough estimates of how of the kind of the value that he gave away on the bases, because he was caught stealing a bit too often, even when he was a good, even when he was able to steal 15-20 bases a year. We've got estimates on his fielding, that aren't great. But more than anything, I think we just an understanding of just how good you have to be. We've got like it bothers me a little bit, for example, that Dave Parker is now on his fourth or fifth time on one of these ballots here. And Reggie Smith, a guy who was legitimately on a rate basis a much more productive hitter than Parker, a very good defender, played on some excellent World Series teams. I think he was on the losing side, 3 times, 67, 77, 78. You can count 81, I guess, too. I can't even sniff a ballot. And that when you look at OPS plus or wins above replacement, Reggie Smith has much better numbers. Dave Parker's numbers, I have it up here. Dave Parker and Harold Baines have nearly identical numbers in terms of Parker 40.1 career WAR, Baines 38.8. Baines had more hits, Baines had more home runs, Baines had about 1,000 more plate appearances, and so Baines was less valuable. He DH'd a bit. 121 OPS plus for Parker, 111 for Baines. But it's like Harold Baines is kind of the sub floor. We don't want to be measuring players next to Harold Baines. If you're just a little bit better than Harold Baines, that doesn't qualify for the Hall of Fame. I can give you 5 right fielders that I'd put in the Hall of Fame before Parker. Reggie Smith, Dwight Evans, Gary Sheffield. If we're going to set the steroid issue aside, Sammy Sosa. I understand you don't have to agree with me there, and obviously then Ichiro's coming up here too.
They should all be in. I agree. So should
I'm
not saying exclude them.
Yeah, no, I know, and I think unfortunately when we get to these 8-man ballots or the 10, but before it was a 10-man ballot, it's not just an up or down vote. It is a preference list, and I can't say that Dave Parker is one of the 3 guys that I would give my vote to on this ballot. Even if I felt completely sentimental, I don't think I could justify putting him ahead of Dick Allen, putting him ahead of Vic Harris, a great Negro Leagues player who hasn't gotten his due. Louis T. Tommy John, Ken Boyer. I mean, they all have cases too. The one I'm struggling with, about to run the profile tomorrow, Tommy John, is kind of the same boat as Parker. I mean, had a few outstanding years, had a very, very long career. Obviously, we know the surgery is kind of a big, extra credit type thing. How much extra credit, whether he's in the Hall of Fame or whether you think he's a Hall of Famer, a lot of it hinges on how much extra credit you want to grant him, which is a very subjective thing. And then you run into the, is he one of the 3 best guys on this ballot? And even if you think Tommy John is worthy of the Hall of Fame, you have to ask yourself that question. But then, on the other side of that, it's like, hey, we should also try to maybe, if we do think these guys are close, we should probably try to get them in while they're alive, because it really sucks to be talking about,
absolutely,
putting in Dick Allen 2 years after he's died, or putting in Louis T. right after he died. That sucks. And the problem is that we're not going to get another chance to do this for 3 more years. I hope. I don't want to keep disappointing the fans of Dave Parker. I don't want to keep disappointing Dave Parker, man. I like I said, I have a lot of empathy for him, and reading Cobra right now, which is this book with Dave Jordan. It's in Parker's voice, and it just, it's impossible not to feel, for him, to root for him, and so you don't want to disappoint the guy. But the hard reality is that there's not room for all these guys in the Hall of Fame, and the line has to be somewhere. And my line, unfortunately, I think is above Dave Parker. But that doesn't mean I don't think highly of his career or wish him all the best.
Yeah, I was. You bring up Harold Baines, right? And I feel like Harold Baines is kind of like the de facto. Oh well, he was better than Harold Baines, right? And it's well, yeah, like how. Cody asks here in the comments, right? This might be a dumb question, but do we think the standards to get into the Hall of Fame are too high? And I think that's a whole other philosophy that we can discuss. Is a Harold Baines caliber player worthy of the Hall of Fame? Yes or no? Right?
No. So, next question.
Yeah. So that's the thing. So if the answer is no, then you can't really use that argument when you're applying to Dave Parker. So I think it just kind of depends on yeah, like I said, the philosophy there. So I think I think there's a few ways to look at the Hall of Fame. Like, yeah, like is it about the story of baseball, like you said, Doug, or is it about honoring the best of the best? I think it can be both, So, but yeah, it's an interesting case because he's been talked about for this for so long. I mean, he's been on ballots for 25 years now, essentially, on and off, different ballots, different committees, different things. He is probably not going to be around much longer to see himself get in if he doesn't get in now. Unfortunately, that's kind of just the reality of the situation. And it's like, yeah, if there's going to be a time to put him in, it probably is now. But then you look at this list and you mention you can only vote for 3 of these guys, and you stack them up, and you can't put Dave Parker in the top 3.
Yeah. Yeah, it's tough. And going back, I think the comparison to Jim Rice was interesting. I thought Rice was a fairly mediocre selection for the Hall of Fame. This was what, 15 years ago now. Rice has better numbers than Dave Parker, even though I think Dave Parker, I would tell you that Dave Parker was the better all-around player. Certainly, I never saw Jim Rice do anything defensively that made me go, holy, bleep.
Yeah.
Rice had the advantage of playing in a much more hitter-friendly ballpark. He did end up with better rate stats, even park-adjusted rate stats, and like I said, better wins above replacement. But I would submit that Parker was probably the better all-around player of the two of them. But if I can't make a case that Parker was clearly better on the statistics than Jim Rice, then we're really in trouble. If I'm trying to advance the argument that he should be in the Hall of Fame, it's just my heart wants to, but I can't. My brain says where are you going to find the numbers for this? So
Yeah, I mean, as a Pirates fan, obviously I would love to see him in.
Well, here, here's one for you. There is a former Pirate coming up on this upcoming ballot that I do plan to advocate for. Do you have any guesses as to who that might be?
Which ballot? Like the
writers ballot, not the veterans ballot, the writers ballot.
The writers ballot.
He'll be a first-time candidate.
Russell Martin.
Yep, Russell Martin. I see Russell Martin's pitch framing numbers off the charts. He's right up there with Yadier Molina, Buster Posey, as one of the best of his era. And you look at what he did. I see him as a transformative player in Pittsburgh and in Toronto. Both of those teams ended droughts, playoff droughts, right when he arrived. He helped them to multiple playoff berths. He helped change the culture. I saw it a little bit in New York. I grew up watching. I was a Dodgers fan growing up, so I watched a lot of him with the Dodgers. Because I've always tuned into the Dodgers. One of my favorite players to watch, and somebody who I think is a real kind of out of left field choice for the Hall of Fame. But when I look at him with the framing numbers, I'm like, yeah, I'm going to talk about this guy, because if we're going to talk about Yadier Molina being a Hall of Famer in a few years, you're going to listen to me talk about Russell Martin first, and then Buster Posey. So I'm looking forward to talking about that. I don't think he's going to get in. I'm not even sure he's going to make it to the next ballot. But we're going to talk about Russell Martin. We're going to talk about what he did for that brief little return to relevancy of the Pirates when he was there 10, 12 years ago.
Yeah, I think kind of along those same lines too. If we're talking catchers, like I always thought Jason Kendall kind of had an argument too.
Yeah, Kendall's framing numbers unfortunately are like the other direction. They're really not good. I think if Kendall had come up 10 years later, they either would have worked hard to get him better at that. And we've seen it's a pretty malleable skill. You could teach a guy who's not a good framer to be a good framer. They don't all go the way of Ryan Doumit, who was kind of the poster boy for bad framing. Unfortunately,
he lost like 30 WAR and
yeah, no, it was ridiculous. Poor guy, it's ridiculous. But I think either they would have trained him to be better at that, and the Pirates were really kind of ahead of the curve once that stuff came to light. They had Francisco Cervelli, another one. They and the Yankees were both kind of ahead of the curve, and they'd swap those catchers back and forth. Either that, they would have moved Kendall off the position and gotten him, playing somewhere else, and his bat would have been in the lineup more. He might have stayed healthier, and we'll, been interesting to see what his career would have done. But I enjoyed writing about Kendall when I wrote about his Hall of Fame profile. I think the framing numbers make it a little hard to put him in quite the same class as Martin, but certainly a guy that I know means a lot to Pirates fans.
Yeah. Well, Jay, you just made 94.4% of the people out there sad with your news.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I don't get to talk about the Pirates much. And I hope that this team builds something. I mean, we saw flickers of it this year with Skeens and Jones and and some of the hitters. So they were a much more watchable team this year, I thought. So I think things are at least trending in the right direction, and we're all going to be watching Skeens next year. That's for sure.
Well, we're all going to have this conversation too about Andrew McCutchen in about 5 years. It's probably going to go similarly.
Probably.
And I don't know if you can tell by the jersey hanging up behind me. I'll be on Team Doug on that one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, a lot of people have asked me about Kutch, and again, I think it's not dissimilar from Parker. I mean, like, the specifics are obviously different. He didn't have a fall from grace the way Parker did, but outside of a short period where he really was one of the best players in the game, his value has kind of been kind of mid, and I'm glad he's still playing. I'm glad he's back in Pittsburgh and getting the love that those fans have for him. But it'll be interesting to see what how the rest of his career unfolds. I hope that Pirates fans continue to show him the love, if nothing else.
I think we will. Well, Jay, I know you got to run. We appreciate you hopping on here.
Thanks, Jay. Good stuff.
Yeah, sure thing, guys.
It's always
we don't have to agree. It's always fun to bat this stuff around. If everybody agreed, it wouldn't be any fun.
Exactly. Like I said, once you kind of told me what you were going, I was like, oh man, we got to get Doug on. This is going to be a good show. So
okay.
But no, appreciate you, Jay. Again, follow Jay. He's coming out with his articles on Fangraphs. I think they've been coming out either every day or every other day on all the players on this committee. So the Dave Parker one, I'm assuming, coming out relatively soon.
Next week. Yep. Early next week. Yeah. So
we'll be sure to share that one once it gets posted. But appreciate you coming on again, guys. We'll catch you all later. But yeah, everybody watching, appreciate you all. If you're listening on the podcast after this, thanks a lot. Write a review, if you like what you hear, and we'll talk to you all later. See you guys.
Hey, you all. Thank you for watching. I know we try to provide the most entertaining content that we can, and we'd love to spread it to as many people as possible. So I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but if you could take the 5 seconds to like this video and subscribe to the page, it helps out so much more than you know. Thank you, and let's go Bucks.